Good morning, traders, and a happy Tuesday out there to everyone. Hope that everyone had a nice evening there and are all ready for this day in front of us. And just before we go diving into the charts here, as we know, we're fairly light on the U.S. side of things as far as the calendar goes for today. But we do have a CPI figure that'll be due out from Canada out at 8:30 Eastern. So, in case following the currency groups there, would be noteworthy to take into account. But outside of that, as the day progresses on there, outside of the CPI from Canada there, we just have a list of FOMC speakers there throughout the day. I think they're coming in at a conference there, so that's why we see a handful of them listed on the calendar there. So, good items to take into account there. But, with that said, we're going to come into our daily charts here, particularly with this S&P, and start to see what we have lining up from the overnight session coming into our U.S. morning today. Alright, so we know yesterday we closed still in balance as far as the S&Ps go. Right? We were unable to fully take out the 2-day high, and of course we kept it above the 5 SMA and that previous day's low. So continuing on our persistency of trend on the daily charts, just meaning that we have the extended run still intact. We have been getting a little closer towards the daily 5 SMA. We can see the nature of this 5 SMA oscillator much greater, and just giving us a little idea that we've had mild shortening in the length of the swings up here. But what we've also been doing, very interestingly, is trading around the previous high test that we had on the daily charts, just not doing the greatest job on closing on the other side of it, meaning that we've tested over the past 3 to 4 trading days on the other side of it and are just closing just a notch beneath it. So that's the 53.33 half, which we already have taken out, yes, so it's, a valid point of interest, but we've been kind of trading and digesting ourselves around that here today. So we'll take that into account. And then as well, speaking on these daily charts, you have 53.27 and change as that daily 5 SMA. So sitting just kind of near that from the overnight session. Then as we come in here on the hourly charts, right, this is kind of a similar display as to what we had going on there yesterday, right? So we came up, gave it a good thorough try in terms of testing up towards that 53.49, fell just a notch shy, so we haven't really moved outside of this broader range. And it's fairly wide, right? 49 down to 53.05, 75, but those are going to be kind of more of our more intermediate points of interest, right? A breach on either one of them would likely generate some additional interest there for the S&Ps, but that's essentially what we're left with here. Relatively tiny overnight session range, so as we get closer towards the opening, we'll keep in mind any gaps, but for now we closed at 53.31, basis that 415 close, and we're trading right around 53.32 half. So not too bad there. We'll be trading at the lower end of yesterday's pit session range. So that's kind of where we're leaving off there in the S&P. Certainly ones that we'll want to watch off that opening there, see as to how we handle ourselves, because we can get some better range expansion since we still closed in balance there yesterday, so we'll keep an eye out for that. And then moving on along, we also have the DAX future here as well, which has been very curious or interesting because it has already gotten the close, or had its close rather, beneath the daily 5 SMA. We did do some testing back on the other side of it yesterday, just did not close up there, so we left the high yesterday at 18,887. 18,857 was that daily 5 SMA. So did some brief testing back on the other side of it, and now we just want to be aware of the fact that we have that tail from at the end of last week that would be doing some retesting on. So 18,708, which we'll look at in just a moment, will also be kind of an important area there for the DAX, but decent testing phase for it, and then we'll start to see some more detail on these hourly charts. Also in honor of Delphine, right, following up from what we were seeing on these hourly charts there into the tail end of the day yesterday. We have been able to develop a notch better in terms of the oscillator, giving us more of that ABC or two-part wave correction down in the case of the DAX future. So when we were coming back up here, this was the testing back above the daily 5 SMA, so we just didn't quite sustain it, so we had our pullback, and we've just come down in a decent rhythm. So of course what stands out to us there is our nice tail that we left. That's that same 18708 that we saw in the daily charts. So that's going to be quite an important area there for the DAX. Taking that out would not be very constructive for them. So we'll put a yellow line there just to kind of denote its caution. But outside of that, ABC down on these hourly charts, filling out some range and still yet to get itself to close back on the other side of that 5 SMA despite testing back above it there yesterday. Alright, that's where we're coming in with the DAX future there today. And then we have our euro currency here, which, like we said, it is some Canada CPI figure, so we could see some activity in some of these other currency groups. But here with the euro currency, another group that closed yesterday in balance, right? It's a 3-bar balance on the close there. We've kept it pretty contained so far coming into the session. I do think these hourlies and 120-minute time frames should serve quite well. It's just showing the nature in which we're consolidating after having our nice advancement up or a bit of channeling activity, the higher cycle highs and the slightly higher cycle lows. So we have that going for us, and now what we're starting to see is we have our one lower high, our one higher low. So we're starting to form ourselves out a bit of a range here in that of the euro currency. So the low from our trading 2 days ago there, or just a Friday's low, at 1.08495. It's a ways down there, but I'm kind of viewing in this sense here that we had our impulse up, a nice complex correction, failed to make a full new high. So then we came back and we put in what would be our second lower high. So a little bit of caution with that of the euro currency, but we have plenty of room to roam inside this area. So we'll see as to what type of activity they get as well. CPI from Canada could, get some gyrations, and it's also going to be quite similar, just on the opposite side in terms of what we have going on with the dollar index, right? Impulse down, a little balancing act there on the close yesterday inside range bars, so dollar also pretty much in line as it should be, moving mostly inverse that of the euro currency. Right, and then we have the gold here. Gold being quite steady on its approach. Right, we know that we rang the bell there yesterday in terms of getting the full test up. Of course, that was done in the overnight session, but we did a pretty fine job of keeping ourselves propped up. We traded back to that previous day's high and held up quite well. So here in the gold, we have a very wide one. Would be a little more symmetrical in terms of that, impulse down. That's your first portion, your one slightly lower high, and then two, your slightly lower low. So giving us that nice two-part wave or ABC down on both of those time frames, right? The hourly and the 120-minute chart. So into these areas are points of interest, right? The top of this consolidation phase is the 2441.5. Taking that out gives us better odds of getting follow through and trading back up towards that tail area from yesterday. And what would change the line of thinking, right, is if we came up and failed to take out that point and started to unwind this 2408 would be caution zone, coupled with the fact that's where our daily 5 SMA comes into sight there with the gold. But this is a constructive, tone and technical condition here on these hourly charts. So the way we corrected that momentum on the slow line all the way back down to zero, didn't do too much major damage in the price. Tested that daily 5 SMA overnight, left a nice tail and keeping themselves propped up. So here with the gold, you have your set of 3, 6, 7, 8. So we're starting to work on that extended run as well in the gold like we have in our index futures there, all right? So that's the GC, and then we have the crude here. The crude kind of keeping itself in the broader range, right? Giving us more of that bracketing a market feeling, right? Being prone towards the test rejects upper and lower end of the range. So we are seeing a healthier swing down coming in from the crude overnight. Not necessarily from balance, but we had a case where we were 3 days of low to high, our first, high to low day yesterday. So coming into these areas here with the crude, obviously plenty of price bar overlap to work with, but also I'm down into these areas in front of course, the big giant tails that we've left way down there, viewing 77.56. 77.35 as being a small window right in front of all these deeper tails that we had, since we did put in a good amount of work inside those areas, right? And when I say in front of the tails, just meaning in front of the full spike lows, right? Closer towards that 76 mark. But inside this area, as we come down, we have all these previous little testing phases that we had. So viewing that as being somewhat of the lower end of the range. So as we come down towards those areas, just as how we had done on the upside, keeping an eye in case they try to, defend them or, fade the lower end of the range and vice versa with the upper end. So one that we'll keep on the radar there for today there, and that is the crude. And then lastly, we have the bonds, which have been on a very interesting, subtle retracement here, right? We had our nice impulse up. We escaped ourselves as well. Let me get rid of some of these colors here. We escaped ourselves from, in other words, this price bar overlap phase here, right, where we had the green, red, back and forth, oscillating on both sides. So we expanded nicely up through it. We spent the past 3 trading days retracing all of that movement, and where we've come back to is the top portion of that previous consolidation range. So that shows up here on the 240-minute display. It's just a little more dramatic, but it's essentially in reference to this whole zone here, where we had built out a little bit of range before thus then accelerating and then retracing things back. So viewing this 117.07 as being the top of that previous range, referring to that little tail up there. So we're beneath that currently. We've had the full retracement, so into this area, as opposed to being a singular data point, I'm just viewing this region here in the bonds as far as where we came back to. This being a little support area or previous sideways congestion or consolidation phase. So that's where we're kind of landing here in the case of these bonds. We can also note the oscillator condition here, kind of our initial 2-part wave down, and we really failed to materialize in lift at all, especially during yesterday's trading. So we had the ABC down, then ultimately came in and took out that low. So that's why we're seeing these 3 separate waves here on that 310 oscillator. So might still very well have some work cut out for them there in those case of those bonds. But not too bad, right? Like we said, came into big chunky previous supportive area. We spent 6 days perhaps overlapping inside of that zone, so we moved out of it, 3 days back down, and where we started to trade in last night and previous day was just at the top of these previous daily bars. So just a nice visual as far as the bonds go. Alright, and with that said, we're going to dial it back, get some charts back and adjusted here. We have the CPI from Canada that will be due out. Not sure it'll impact our U.S. markets all too much, but always good to note. So we'll leave that hourly chart displayed, and we'll be on our merry way here. We got this nice Tuesday lining up in front of us, so we'll let this all get settled in, see what type of movement we get off of this 8 a.m. reading for today. Then we'll have a captain coming on at the top of the hour there at 9 o'clock, and we'll be able to see the market profile visual as well, get ourselves lined up with our nice reference levels. So I'll be coming up shortly, in just a little over 2 minutes, and we'll get the data out of the way.